55 Ways. We are the co-authors of the new book, Alaska Adventure 55 Ways, subtitled South Central Wilderness Explorations. I hope you'll come with me and Becca across the little bridge and down the trail as we explore further into the book and further into the Alaska outdoors. Now, I said that this is a new book, but it has a backstory, and the backstory goes back about 50 years and starts with our family, and particularly with my mom, Helen Nienhauser, who was the original author of 55 Ways to the Wilderness in South Central Alaska, originally published in 1972. That's me and my brother with her on the left, and Helen in recent years on the right. So this is the suite of books that preceded our current book. The original edition there on the left was from 1972, as I said, and I was about 9 years old when that came out, and it apparently took 4 or 5 years to put into production, to do the research and write it up and get it printed and all that. So it started when I was about 5, and I was taken along on many of those trips. But I grew up and loved the outdoors as a result, and I became co-author with that green book, the 4th edition. The original book was, Helen was the author, and then there was Nancy Zimmerman as photographer and Hans van der Laan as the cartographer. With 2nd and 3rd editions, Helen and Nancy were co-authors, and then, like I said, in the 4th edition, I became co-author when Nancy no longer lived in Alaska. And then Becca grew up, and I forgot a piece here that originally the book started as a cooperative effort of the Mountaineering Club of Alaska and the Mountaineers in Seattle, 2 nonprofits focused on the outdoors. And the original effort was 30 Hikes in Alaska, a small booklet. And because my mom was active in the Mountaineering Club of Alaska, she participated in putting that booklet together. And then when they decided to create a real book, ultimately she was tapped to be the author. And why did she do that? Well, there's an inscription. Like I said, I was about 9 when the book came out, and she inscribed a book to me and put it on a shelf where it would be safe. And so I've still got it in good condition. And it says in the inscription, and I think this explains the motivation for writing it and why we continue to be motivated today. It says, "I hope you enjoyed the hikes we took together when I was writing this book, and that you will always love hiking and wilderness. I hope there will always be wilderness for you and your children to know." And it seems to us still that one of the very best ways for people to encompass the idea of protecting wild lands is to enjoy wild lands, to get out there and be in them. And so the guidebook is got that behind it. So like I said, in the 4th edition, I became co-author. By that time, Rebecca was here and was about 2. So this is my mom and I and Becca when that book came out. Subsequently, of course, Becca grew up, and now she is co-author, and Mom is still here, and she has written the foreword to this book.
So our book covers South Central Alaska is what we covered, and actually, so all versions of this book over 50 years have covered the South Central Alaska region, and that's because when the original project came about with the Mountaineering Club and the Mountaineers of Seattle, the Mountaineers wanted a guidebook to all of Alaska, and Grandma thought about that for a little bit and then realized that's going to be a really big project. I think we need to pare it down a little bit to make that manageable as a guidebook. Alaska is a big state, and as many of you listening know, there are a lot of special places, and we just had to pick something to start with. So South Central Alaska is the part of Alaska that's the most accessible to the most people along the road system. And so that's kind of why it was picked. That is still the region that we cover in the new guidebook. And that covers, we break the guidebook then down further into 4 regions, that being the Kenai Peninsula, the greater Anchorage municipality area, the Mat-Su borough, and then out in the Copper Basin, which includes Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and the road system down to Valdez.
So in a sense, South Central Alaska can be thought of as a microcosm of the entirety of the state. You can see on this map that, as Becca said, there's the nation's largest national park. There on the right, the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve. There's the Denali Park and Preserve, National Park and Preserve to the northwest, and Denali State Park immediately adjoining it. And we have 2 trips that are right on the edge of Denali National Park in the state park. Most of the municipality of Anchorage is Chugach State Park, and down on the Kenai Peninsula, Chugach, and across the Prince William Sound is Chugach National Forest, including a wilderness study area in that, and then farther to the southwest, Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. And then Kachemak Bay State Park and State Wilderness Park. And you'll hear some references to some of those as we go along. One interesting note as an example is the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge and Chugach National Forest. The original designations were in something like the very early 1900s. I think the National Forest in 1907 and what was then called the Kenai National Moose Range a few years later. But that's also the area where the first oil was discovered in Alaska. So we hear about oil development on the north slope of Alaska and its adjacency to wild lands and wildlife habitat. But the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge had oil drilling in it, and there's a wilderness unit, the nearest wilderness unit to the population, to most of the population of Alaska is there as well. So it's kind of side by side, and that's part of the microcosm of the rest of the state.
So when we talk about South Central Alaska, we like to make sure we point out that South Central Alaska is and always has been Indigenous land. Indigenous people have been stewarding this land for thousands and thousands of years, and we're grateful for that stewardship. South Central Alaska is Dena'ina land, Ahtna land, and Sugpiaq or Alutiiq land. And that's something that we point out in our book. When you come to a trip in the book that you'd like to go on, we always point out whose land you're on. That's always an important thing to do when you're traveling. We also like to point out this website in the bottom right, nativeland.ca, is available as an app and a website. It's a great, really quick kind of initial way to understand whose land you're on in the US in general. So wherever you are, it's a great resource to start learning about Indigenous land.
And in fact, globally, I think
that's true.
The map is worldwide. Okay, so we should add that we are currently in Anchorage, and that is Dena'ina land. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do here is go into a couple of the trips in the book in somewhat more detail than you would find in the book, and particularly with more photos than you would find in the book. And then after that, there'll be some brief parts showing what other things are in the book and other areas in brief. So this first one that we'll go into is, I guess, a little bit on the more difficult side, and it's a backpacking trip. The next one will be a little bit on the easier side, also a backpacking trip. And we wanted to sort of give those two ends of the spectrum. The Tutka Backdoor Trail is the first one. It's also trip number 1 in the book. It's a almost brand new trail, still being developed in Chugach Bay State Park. It's before we leave this screen, I just wanted to show that this is the kind of trip data we give for each trip, giving things like the distance and time expected, for example, but also we get a trail difficulty by talking about the elevation gain and the surface and the grade. You can see about 2/3 of the way down the indigenous land lines saying that this is Dena'ina Athabaskan and Chugach land for this trip. It's kind of right on the borderline of those two populations. You can also see the existing managing agency and maps and other details. Okay, so as Becca said, most of the trips by design are meant to be easily accessible, and that means mostly from the road system. We don't have fly-in trips. There are many good fly-in trips in Alaska, but they are definitely more expensive and more out there. So in trying to make it as accessible as possible, we focus on the road system, with minor exceptions for some rail accessible trips and water taxi accessible trips. And this one happens to be by water taxi across from Homer, across Chugach Bay, and then up a side bay, a fjord called Tutka Bay. And it's, I think, something like an hour water taxi ride, and very beautiful in itself. This trip, you can see the T for the trailhead near the head of Tutka Bay. This trip follows the head of the bay for a ways and then goes upriver on Backdoor Creek into Chugach Bay State Park and Chugach Bay State Wilderness Park. And I think it's just an interesting side note that Alaska has wilderness park, and this is the state equivalent of federal wilderness, and it's not very well known even to Alaskans, I think, that we have such designation. Anyway, this trail follows Backdoor Creek kind of flat for a ways, and then climbs up to Lunch Mountain, just past those zigzags, and then continues farther up the valley, opens up, you'll see, and then an area called Tundra Playground, right at the limits of any tree line, and then we're getting into the true alpine zone, heading towards Tutka Pass. And the trip we described goes to Tutka Pass and returns. This trail continues to Taylor Bay. That's typically a fly-in and hike out, or the reverse. And because of the fly-in part, we don't describe that in detail, but we definitely give a big hint that it's there, and it is a fantastic continuing trail. It's about 20 miles from Tutka Bay to Taylor Bay, and it's about 22 to go to the pass and back. So this is about halfway. So as I said, the trip starts on the water, and this water taxi creates a beautiful ride by itself, and it lets you off at the beach, and immediately you go from this wide open expanse of water and views into a dense coastal rainforest, old growth forest with lots of moss hanging on the trees and the sun filtering through. And it's very beautiful in its own way, and different than being out on the water. This trail was conceived and built by a volunteer group based in Seldovia, and they've done it entirely with hand tools, as far as I know. No mini mechanized equipment out here. They're doing it on foot, and you can see the hand lettered sign. This may be just a temporary sign, but this junction shows Taylor Bay to the left and Sentinel Ridge to the right, and we will come back to Sentinel Ridge at the very end of this. But at this point, we're on our way toward the Tutka Pass and Taylor Bay. So as I said, you go along the flat through the forest for a while and then climb up, and this is the Lunch Mountain spot, and we characterize it as a hinge point in the trip where you can look back over the territory you've come, down the length of Tutka Bay and across Cook Inlet on a good day to Iliamna Volcano, which you can see there in the distance. From this spot, you also can look forward the direction we're going into the mountains and see what's coming. And as you continue through another mile or two, then the valley opens up into this levelish open area, and we're getting to the edge of the tree line, so it's open and becomes easier walking. And you can see that there isn't actually a tread of trail there. It's following rock cairns, and that's part of the reason this is a more rugged trip. Farther up valley, there are some really rocky footing and snow fields to cross and rivers to cross. So those are other reasons that this is a more rugged trip, as well as just being more remote. You can see on the left here where the crew carved out a good trail tread where needed in a steep cross slope. Another example of their work is in the center photo. If you look carefully, there's a directional arrow next to the boot carved in the rock. And then, as we said, they have put many cairns out there in areas where it's otherwise there's not a visible trail. So we camped in this area that's been dubbed the Tundra Playground at kind of the upper end of that flat area. Beautiful place to camp, surrounded by peaks, and has a tundra playground in the tundra, some nice rock outcrops, the river not far away, and some very nice small water features right at hand for looking at as well as drinking. And as we settled in, the bears came out. This area, this trip is known for being black bear habitat, and lots of people see black bears. And we did, and luckily they were at this distance, and we were not bothered at all, and we like seeing them at about that far away. So I went to bed that night with this sunset light on the peaks up the valley, and got up the next morning and continued up valley towards the last trees, and then the rocky area approaching the pass. Here with it, to cross Backdoor Creek twice, and this is an example. It's not super deep. When we were there in July. It wasn't super deep. It is a little bit of a long crossing, and it could be trickier at higher water, but it's not a bridge. Just continuing up toward the next crossing. I think these two crossings are to get around Impossible Creek, which I take it was named because it was found to be impossible to cross, at least relatively speaking. This is at that second crossing site. Farther up, there's a sort of a canyon-esque stretch where you're walking beneath the cliffs and above the river, and it's quite nice aesthetically, not overly difficult walking. And finally, in the upper valley, it's snow and rock, the glacier that you can kind of see on the upper part of this photo seems like just recently receded off of this pass area. And when we were there in July, we were walking partly across some snow patches and partly across the rock. And the pass itself is just out of the frame to the right. And this was looking over the other side, past some purple lupin and down the valley and enticing around the corner. But this is about as far as we went, and turned around and went back the way we came. So that addendum I was going to tell you about the Sentinel Ridge Trail, you can see in this bit of map on the left that back near the trailhead where we started, there's the Sentinel Ridge Trail takes off, and it goes up and over a ridge and comes out ultimately farther down Tutka Bay, and you can arrange to get picked up there at Sea Star Cove Cabin, which is a state park cabin. And so that's what we had arranged. And this is about the only photo we took on that traverse over the ridge, because it was the only rest we took, because we were worried about not being on time to catch our boat. And so we put a little note in the book that it would be a lot more fun if you just planned plenty of time to get to your boat. And that's one thing about taking a water taxi, is that there's a schedule involved. Anyway, that is a great trip. It's beautiful, and it's becoming more known as the last couple of years as it's been in place just the last couple of years. Okay, on to the next.
All right, so the second trip we're gonna cover in depth is a little bit tamer of a trip compared to the Tutka Backdoor Trail, but it's also a very great couple-day backpacking adventure. It's an 18.5-mile loop, which makes a perfect backpacking trip of 2 to 3 days, depending on your speed. There are plenty of mountain runners that will run it in a day, no problem. And this is actually in Chugach State Park, which is just outside of Anchorage. So for us in Anchorage, it's feels relatively close to home, but also can feel really out there once you're there. You're not really far from town, but it can feel that way. It's interesting to note that Chugach State Park is, of course, one of our most beloved parks for the huge population in Anchorage, but Chugach State Park was also protected because of a citizen initiative. So, and my grandma Helen was involved in that project. So just about the time that the first book was published in 1972, Chugach State Park was coming into being, and it's served recreationists in Anchorage extremely well, and has kept the preservation of this really beautiful Chugach Front Range that we can see from our homes in Anchorage. So this trip takes place in Chugach State Park, just in that Chugach Front Range. And this is the way the trip looks. We recommend taking a trip from Prospect Heights Trailhead in Anchorage in a counterclockwise direction. That's starting on the Middle Fork Loop Trail, as you can see here, heading up the Willowa Lakes Trail towards a couple of first lower elevation lakes that you hit, and then taking a turn up a pass to some higher elevation lakes. And then from the pass, you come down into the North Fork of Kimball Creek Valley, passing Long Lake, and then heading out that long, broad valley. And then you go up and over a little mountain called Near Point, and then back down the Wolverine Bowl Trail to the Prospect Heights Trailhead. You can see a lot of the trips that we have in this book have many variations to them. You can see in this example that the red line shows our kind of most recommended route, but there are plenty of other routes you can do. For example, from the Glen Alps Trailhead, which is another great trailhead, very popular trailhead in the area. And so it can be done from Glen Alps as well, and you'll hear some variation there. I chose this trip to talk about in part because I have kind of a fun history with this area, and I've gotten to do this trip several times over the years with different people and at different stages of my own life. And it's all been fun, but some of them have been adventures. So the first time I did this trip, I was 2, and I got carried on that trip, and I don't otherwise remember it, but I think it was great.
It was.
You remember. The second time I did this trip, my sister was 10 and I was about 13, and we got to go with some family friends, which was a great choice because it's always less complaining involved when we had friends along. So we started out looking all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and quickly started looking like this because it was very rainy. It was extremely soggy the entire trip. There was some good solid downpour. There was lots of just hanging out in the mist. We rightfully look a little skeptical about how this trip's going to go. But it actually turned out to be a great trip. We had a lot of fun, as I remember. We didn't let the sogginess deter us. I think at this point we were already like wet underneath our rain gear. You can also see we've got some really high-tech garbage bag pack covers going on in this photo. I think they were imperfect, but nonetheless, we carried on and actually had a great time. This was our tent set up after the storm. I don't know if it was a storm, it was just very rainy. After the rain had abated, we were trying to dry out our gear there on the left, probably to no avail. But we were having a great time just running around in the tundra. There was a toothpaste spitting contest with our bare feet in the tundra. And generally we had a great time. I remember it being a great trip and being a memorable trip, and then also one of the better outdoor memories of my childhood, just because it was fun despite the weather. A couple of years later, actually 6 years later, several years later, I was a camp counselor at Trailside Discovery Camp, and I'm not at liberty to use these kids' faces in my presentation, but they were stars, you can tell. These were about 10-year-olds, I think. And myself and my co-leader had a great time taking these kids out into the wilderness. They were, a lot of them didn't have a bunch of experience hiking. I'm sure several of them didn't have any experience backpacking. And it was a little bit of a hodgepodge, and not everyone's pack was adjusted correctly, as you can see, but we made it probably a little more than a mile down the trail. This was from the Glen Alps trailhead, and we ended up just camping on the Middle Fork Loop Trail. So it's really not far from the trailhead, but it was a great way to just get the kids out, and we ended up camping there, and then we took a day hike to the first Willowa Lakes, up the Willowa Lakes Trail. And so that was a great way to just let the kids shed some of their weight and just get to be kids out in the tundra. They had lots of fun playing at those first lakes. You can tell that the trail is not very arduous from either trailhead to get to the first lakes. There's not a whole lot of steep trail or anything, but it's still a very dramatic landscape back there in the back of the valley. Of course, lakes are always great for kids to play in. And we actually saw a lot of wildlife on that trip. I believe all these photos were taken from our camp that was a mile and change from the trailhead. But we saw moose and Dall sheep up on the mountainside, and a ptarmigan in the brush. Another testament to you don't really need to go far to get a good outdoors experience. And this was our camp. In the sunset, it was a beautiful time. A great thing about this trip too was that we had a lot of downtime, so there's plenty of time for the kids to just be kids in the tundra and make up their own games and explore different plants and rocks and just get to have this really immersive experience. And that was our sunset view. We're actually looking out over Anchorage, but you can also see the inlet beyond and the mountains beyond. And it was just I remember it being a super great trip. So a couple years later, I actually went with my friend Hannah on this trip, and I was like in between years of college, and I had a little bit of hubris going on, and I didn't consult my dad and grandma's hiking guidebook before I went, and we decided to go counterclockwise, which is not the way we recommend in the book. And also you can see here there's a trail on Route A on our map there, and there's a kind of alternative route you could take on Route B on our map there, both of which are described in the text. Hannah and I decided to go on Route C, which was a very quick jump off a ridge. It turns out that's not the way to go. It did not work out well for us. We hit alders very quickly. So on the right, you see the kind of conditions we were dealing with down in that valley. We were just at too low an elevation. There were alders at that elevation, and if we had stayed on the ridge longer, we could have avoided the alders and been in the alpine. So we tried to battle our way up valley through those alders and ultimately couldn't, and decided to head back up to the ridge, up that very steep slope you see on the left. And that's Hannah in the middle, questioning my leadership skills as she crawls on her hands and knees up the steep slope. But ultimately, we busted out of the alders, and it was definitely a misadventure, but a memorable one, and we were able to have a great weekend nonetheless. And then actually not too many years ago, my sister was in college and I was out of college, and we were kind of scattered to the wind, but we had a chance to go camp in the North Fork Valley, just as a family with my parents and my sister and I. And it was a great chance to catch up and have some time in the tent together, just enjoying each other's company. And then the next day we went up to Kishla Peak, which in our book, we have a trips at a glance table at the beginning of the book that that lines out a bunch of information about each trip, and it's really quick and easy way to understand what's in the book and what your options are. But one of the things we put in there is nearby summits trip. So if you're really a nearby summits column. So if you're really a summit junkie and you just want to go up, for any trip in the book, we try to point out what's a good nearby summit from the trail that we're describing. And Tikishla is definitely one. It's definitely a thigh burner, but also a very accomplished feeling summit when you get there. And then thanks to some friends of ours, we have some beautiful pictures of this trip, some of which made it into the book. These friends are much more accomplished photographers than we are and had done this trip recently. So they actually took a route from Glen Alps that went up and over a nearby mountain, I suppose, down to those first lower elevation Willowa lakes. So here you can see them descending to that lake on the left. And they went up and over the pass in misty conditions. They camped at one of the higher elevation Willowa lakes, this beautiful spot. And then headed down to Long Lake in the North Fork Valley. And then out that valley, you can see Anchorage beyond. And then up and over near Point, where they had the company of Dall sheep. And back to town.
Okay. So with those two more in-depth trips behind us, we thought we would give you an idea of what else is in the book. There's quite a bit of variety, and it's not just backpacking trips. And certainly by design, it's called 55 ways rather than 55 hikes, in part because there's a lot of different modes and different seasons. And so we'll try to give you a little sense of what's between the sea and the summit in South Central Alaska. You might have seen in that original map that it's the Gulf of Alaska and Prince William Sound to the south that forms the sort of southern part of South Central Alaska, and the Alaska Range, including up to Denali Summit, the highest point in North America, kind of forming the northern boundary of South Central Alaska. In that 300 or 350 miles north-south and similar distance east-west, there's a lot to do. The example summit here is Monarch Peak on the Hicks Creek Titna Pass trip in the Mat-Su area. And the C example is the Hope Coastal Walk. I think we have coastal walks in each of the coastal communities, and there's a new one at Hope on the Kenai Peninsula.
Alrighty, we also have cross-country ski touring trips in this book, which is the perfect activity to do when there's new, fresh, fluffy snow and you want to go out wallowing it and experiencing the best that winter has to offer. We Alaskans definitely appreciate our winters and try to get out as much as possible when it's dark. And this is an example at Skookum Glacier, which is on the very southern part of the Anchorage area that we cover.
We have canoeing. We have a couple of canoe trips on lakes through chains of lakes. This example is the Nancy Lakes Loop in the Mat-Su area. The other is on the Kenai Peninsula, the Swan Lake Canoe System, which is in that Kenai National Wildlife Refuge and Wilderness that I mentioned earlier. This one is in a state recreation area. Both of them are chains of lakes of various sizes connected by relatively short portages. And it allows you to do anything from a day of lazy paddling or fishing to a multi-day trip portaging between lakes. And both are great trips.
We also have wild skating in this book that hasn't been in any of the previous versions of this book. It's definitely a up and coming sport in Southcentral Alaska. A lot of people enjoy it because it often happens at the times when we don't have quite enough snow yet. So it's a great way to get outside when it's cold but not snowy enough for ski sports. And this is in Rabbit Slough, which is in the Mat-Su, which is that's the Hayflat State Game Refuge. So I was just going to say that in terms of it's a state game refuge that is where this trip takes place.
We have mountain biking. Several of the trails are suitable for mountain biking. Not all of them. Some are too steep or otherwise weird, maybe not allowed. The Russian Lakes Trail is an example of one that has been used by mountain bikers for some years, and the Resurrection Pass Trail as well. These are two well-known trails on the Kenai Peninsula and Chugach National Forest. The Resurrection Pass Trail in particular is long enough at 38 miles that it can be a good bike packing trip overnight by bicycle. There are places to camp and there are cabins out there.
We also have crust skate skiing trips in this book. Crust skate skiing is a great activity for brilliant spring days when the weather is getting warmer and the sun is shining more in Alaska, but we still get cold nights, and that creates a really nice crust on the snow that allows you to go skate skiing all over the backcountry. And so there are several examples of skate skiing trips in this book, including we always mention if it's primarily a summer trip but still makes good skate skiing, we always let you know that. This is at Center Ridge on the Kenai.
In trail running, many of the trails, virtually all of the trails that can be hiked can be run, and that can sometimes be mountain running, which might be hiking fast, but lots of people, mountain running is big in this part of Alaska, and many of the trails are good for that. These two examples are Lost Lake, about 18 miles point to point near Seward on the Kenai Peninsula, and the Rabbit Creek Trail, which out and back would be about 11 miles round trip out to those peaks and the lake at the base of them and back.
We also have fat tire biking in this trip, again, a sport that's kind of up and coming and hasn't been featured in previous versions of our book. Fat tire biking can be done summer or winter. On the right, we have the Rabbit Slough, which we just saw as a wild skating trip, but once the snow does show up, it can be a great fat tire biking trip. That's in that state game refuge I mentioned before. And then fat tire biking in the summer is great on the beach. We have a trip that covers 90 miles of beach biking along Cook Inlet from Homer to Kenai, which is a great trip, especially when the weather is just brilliant.
We have hut and cabin trips. There are quite a few Forest Service cabins and state park cabins, and then there's the nonprofit Alaska Huts Association, which has a hut called Manitoba Cabin. That's it there on the right at the base of Manitoba Mountain, which we have written up as a nice summer, relatively mellow summit. And then in the winter, that's a great backcountry ski mountain. Mm-hmm. In the middle is the Serenity Falls Hut, which is good for hiking, skiing in the winter, mountain biking, and a relatively large state park cabin. And then on the left is the Upper Russian Lake cabin, which is a Forest Service cabin.
And as we showed you in some of our in-depth trips, we definitely have multi-day backpacking in this book, both on-trail and off-trail options. On the left is Kasugi and Curry Ridges. The Curry Ridge Trail is actually under construction and will be open hopefully next summer. But combined, the Kasugi and Curry Ridge trails will create 48 miles of continuous on-trail hiking, which as far as we know is about to be the longest on-trail hiking experience in Alaska. Off-trail, we have Mentasta Mountains Loop, which is in Wrangell St. Elias National Park. It's one of the farthest flung trips in the book, but also a very beautiful place to visit. I forgot to mention Kasugi and Curry Ridges is in Denali State Park, so just outside the national park.
With great views into the heart of the park to Denali and whatnot. And finally, we have, if all the long trips are too much and you're just looking for something short, we have short trips. And an example on the left is short and steep is Lion Head in the Matsu area, and in fact overlooking the Matanuska Glacier at the head of the Matanuska Valley. And it's less than 2 miles round trip, but it's a little bit rugged. It's not a formal trail, and it's got some really steep spots. It's got a little boulder field to negotiate. It's got some slippery, muddy stuff, but it's got a good reward in the view, and some 10,000 foot peaks at the head of the glacier, dividing this area from Prince William Sound. On the right, there's the Shoup Bay Trail in Valdez, which is a short jaunt over relatively flat terrain to the beach, and then the option of continuing along the beach a ways in the fjord-like country of Prince William Sound at Valdez.
Quickly before we move to a Q&A, I want to talk about our website. We've got a website going on to go with this book, and we try to make it kind of a fun and engaging place to be. We have some downloadable hikes on there. So hikes from the new book that you can just download and try out for free. Also hikes from old editions of this book. So our name has always been 55 Ways. And so when there are new trails to add, we definitely retire some old trails, but there's still great trails to go on. And so we put some of those older trails on there. We also have done this experiment with Avenza app maps. Avenza is an app that you can download to your phone, and then you can have an app you can download our map, which you can use offline and use your little GPS dot to track your progress on a trail. And those are kind of new to us. So if you try them out, please let us know if they worked for you. And we also are starting a photo collection called 55 Ways to Nap in the Wilderness. We enjoy relaxing in the wilderness as well as exercising in the wilderness. So if you find yourself in Alaska or anywhere, actually, if you're relaxing in the wilderness, let us know. You can submit a photo on our website, and we'd love to see what you're up to this summer. Also get in touch if you find any changes in the field that we might not know about, any errors or typos in our book. We would love for you to let us know. So yeah, please get in touch with us on the website if you'd like. And just to conclude, we want to leave you with this thought that we hope there will always be wilderness for you and your children to know. And that's the end of our presentation.
Thank you so much, you guys. This is wonderful and so inspiring. I want to get out instantly and go hiking and backpacking and running and also try skating. Yeah, wow, how exciting and fun. Yeah, so we have some questions about a few of the different parts of your presentation. One of the first ones that, or one of the ones that came up that I think relates really well to all of the experiences that you just mentioned was around mosquitoes. And the question was, are there any months in summer or early fall when you can avoid swarms of mosquitoes? I think some people have had experiences that have been a little overwhelming. I didn't see mosquitoes swarming around you guys in your photos though, so tell us your secrets.
We had some good ones actually just from last summer with mosquitoes visibly in the frame no matter what picture you tried to take. We didn't put those ones in there, did we? But
You can see much rain in the pictures.
yeah,
Oh no.
we accidentally put in the good pictures, but I tried to point out the rainy trip too. So yeah, we get rain and mosquitoes for sure up here. I think we do kind of have mosquitoes are a part of the reality of life in Alaska for sure. And so coming prepared if they really bother you is the main thing. You can time your trips to try to avoid mosquitoes. For example, we're just kind of ramping up into mosquito season here in the Anchorage area. So earlier is better for mosquitoes, but then again, there's often snow in the mountains earlier. So we're kind of still waiting for snow to melt off to get to go out on several of these trails. Later in the summer can also be better for mosquitoes, August and September, but also it can be rainier that time of year. So it's all a trade-off. Yeah, I guess our best advice is just to come prepared. In the introduction to our book, we do talk a lot about, the different kinds of gear you can take for mosquitoes and bug repellent. And last summer, no, 2 summers ago, when we were doing the recon for this trip, I found someone had accidentally left some like mosquito gloves at camp, and I put them on my feet and they worked really well. So you can try all kinds of ways to keep the mosquitoes away, but definitely head nets are always a great thing to pack in Alaska. That's the main thing, that like if you're trying to cook outside and the mosquitoes are coming at you, having a head net is a must, especially on some of those, like the portage canoe trails can be really buggy in the midsummer. So yeah, it's just reality. So you can deal a little bit with time and a little bit with gear.
And going up.
Yeah, going up, that's true.
Always good to be in the mountains, in the tundra, out of the tall grass and forest and swamps and into the alpine breezes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that is definitely helpful. With regard to the you mentioned the boating trips. I think it was a canoe trip. Someone asked specifically about kayaking. Do you think that there are routes that are better for kayaks specifically rather than canoes, or how would you differentiate that?
We have we have 2 trips in the book that are boating trips, and they are, pretty much they're lake trips that are well suited to canoes. People certainly do use kayaks, and one of the advantages of the plastic kayaks apparently is that you can just throw a rope over your shoulder and tow them over the roots and stuff and not have to carry all the weight on your shoulder. We have the various coastal walks are in places where you can also use a kayak, and Cain's Head comes to mind as one of the trips where you can hike out there along the coast, but you can also kayak out to the same destination. And so that's one in the book that is particularly well suited to kayaking. And also out of Valdez, kayaking is possible. And we're not, so those are sea kayaking, and we're not a kayaking or sea kayaking guidebook per se, but there's a lot of kayaking to be done in Prince William Sound and in the bays, Kachemak Bay and all the sub bays of Kachemak Bay, for example.
Yeah, I think we aren't necessarily, we definitely like getting around in different modes, but I would say we're kind of primarily hikers, and although we have kayaked, it's not something, there's some really diehard kayakers out there. So we definitely write about what we know, and we definitely mention where there's a different mode possible for sure, but it's not a sea kayak book per se, like you said. It's not primarily sea kayaking trips.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Another question was around, this applies probably the most to the hiking and backpacking, but so you mentioned on the first hike that that it was common to see black bears. Are there, I mean, what has been your experience in how intense the experience is with bears and how dangerous it feels to you? And then also, are there hikes that are kind of more known for having problems with bears, and fewer problems with bears? How do you handle that?
Yeah, well, bears are like mosquitoes, I guess. They're part of, they go with the territory, literally. And of course, we have black bears and brown bears even right into the Anchorage area. So it's sort of an ever-present thing and a thing to just be aware of all the time. And we encourage people in the introduction. We talk about some of this. We encourage people to keep up a lively conversation with whoever they're hiking with, and to hike with other people. And if you happen to be hiking alone or there's a lull in the conversation, to just say hey ho, clap hands, whatnot, so that you're not going to surprise wildlife, or to absolutely minimize your potential for surprising wildlife. This goes to moose as well. And we carry bear spray on virtually everything that we do, even just walking in the park green belt, city park green belt behind our house, and have never had to use it, but it's it's known to be pretty effective, and so we just carry it. It's pretty easy to do. Mm-hmm. What else? I mean, we definitely carry bear barrels in the backcountry to keep food tucked away and away from bears. We have had some run-ins, but never anything terrible. So, and it's really nice to see bears when you see them, like we did on that, in the slideshow. When you're seeing them at a distance, that's great, and it certainly makes you feel like you're out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It's great to see them, and it also gives you like an extra little clue, like, oh yeah, I am in bear country, and remember to really be careful with my food, make sure I'm not getting any food on my clothes that I'm going to take with me into the tent, and be very careful about storing all of our food away in a bear barrel and keeping it far away from our tent at night. And so they're just some best practices that if you are careful about them and make sure you're prepared. We've spent a lot of collective time in the backcountry over generations and definitely seen bears sometimes at close range, but never had a real problem.
Yeah, you hear stories about people getting woken up in the night because bears are like licking their face in their tent because there's toothpaste.
But yeah, so I think the other thing I guess I should point out to be really careful of too is, for whatever area you're heading into, you can check with the managing agency of that area and see if there have been problem bears in the area or near a certain campground that have become accustomed to being around people or had tastes of human food. Those bears are really the ones to look out for. So checking in with the agency before you go on a trip is never a bad idea either.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. You talked about swimming, the kids swimming in the lake, and the weather also did not look particularly warm. How much of this hiking do you think happens at a time when there's an optimal balance of heat during the day to warm you up after jumping in the water, which clearly has almost snow in it?
Yeah, I would say that most Alaskan swimming experiences are chilly, very chilly, and I mean, if you've really worked up a sweat, it's worth it to jump in, but it's usually almost like a polar plunge experience. So kids especially are very drawn to the water and are happy to be playing around the lake no matter what. But yeah, it's cold. That's about just how it is. Yeah, the best you can do is try to go out on a sunny day and work up a sweat before you get there.
Okay. And then down in California, we definitely filter all of our water before drinking it. You were talking about drinking the water. Do you guys filter all of your water when you're hiking, and what do you use to filter it?
I pretty much do use a filter. Yeah, I mean, there's rare exceptions when you're up high and you have water running right off of a snow patch and you're thirsty. And
even then, even if you can see the water coming out of the rock or off of a glacier, it's still your own risk. So we pretty much filter across the board. I prefer a gravity filter, but different people use different kinds of filters, or even pens to like UV pens to sterilize their water. I much prefer a gravity filter because it packs down really easily, and then it's great to just have when you set up camp. You can fill it up and have it hanging. Oftentimes we don't have trees nearby in Alaska, but you can just set it higher up on a slope and let it drain into your water bottle. So I find that really handy.
Okay, thank you. Another thing that people noticed when you were showing some of the backpacking trip was that there's water along a lot of the trails. Do certain hikes and experiences have fishing that while you're backpacking you can fish for your food? Or, I mean, I think that permits are required to do that, but do you talk about that at all in your books, or do you have recommendations?
We try to note where there are fish in streams or lakes where it's popular, but there's probably lots of places where there would be fishing possible, but it isn't well enough known for us to write about. We're not big fisher people ourselves, but certainly, yes, the lakes and streams have fish, and of course there's the salmon in season, but there's also dolly varden and whatnot in the lakes and streams too.
Yeah, we definitely, I would say pretty much in the introduction of hikes that are known for being good fishing places, we like to point out where there's good fishing, kind of well-known good fishing. And we also have that index too. So we try to make sure that people that are looking for fishing can find those trips easily.
Great, okay, thank you. Just checking all of our questions. Yeah, I think that's our last question. I have a colleague on. If you text me if you see any other questions. And in the meanwhile, I just wanted to mention that all of these places that we're talking about here are just part of the amazing parts of Alaska that are so worth protecting. And, you know, at Alaska Wilderness League, we're trying really, really hard to keep Alaska wild and accessible to everyone. And so right now, there are going to be some comment periods and other opportunities to stand up and ask our representatives to continue to keep these places wild. One is with regard to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So we will be sending out emails about that, especially for those of you who are have senators that are Democrats. We have some action alerts for the Arctic Refuge that will be related to that. And then really exciting is a comment period that is coming up that has now been opened to protect Bristol Bay from Pebble Mine. This is a really important comment period and a really, really promising opportunity. The EPA has opened this comment period and looks like they are very open to protecting this mine, Bristol Bay, which is such an important salmon watershed for all time in the future. So really, really great chance for everyone to submit comments, and we will send an action alert out in this week. So I hope that everyone can submit their comments. And lastly, please do support Alaska Wilderness League and our Geography of Hope events by donating. My colleague Lois will post a link to donate to keep these events going, and just everything we do to keep Alaska wild. So thank you for all of that. And thank you so much, Rebecca and John, for speaking with us tonight. It was so fun to hear about Wild Alaska and all of the ways that you can enjoy it. I am just really excited about getting out there.
Great. We want to say thank you so much for having us, Alaska Wilderness League. We were really grateful to have this opportunity to do a slideshow online. Most of our events have been local for local stores, but we're glad to have this kind of national platform to get to talk to people from all over the place. So thank you for having us. And yes, please do support Alaska Wilderness League and all their efforts to protect Alaska.
Yeah, thanks for all you do.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening. Bye.